All right, so I'm going to walk you through the 4-step process that I have that all of my clients go through in order to get their results. And in fact, it's the same process that I went through that I kind of accidentally invented as I was on my own recovery journey. And the interesting thing is this process has been in play for years. It's been in play for years already. And it's only recently where I actually came up with a crystal clear visual with clearly defined steps that has a name and crystal clearly defines the process. And you can visualize yourself going through the process before even engaging in it. And so even though this process has been in play, I finally defined it a bit more and refined it a bit more. So I'm going to walk you through that right now. Okay, so I'm calling this the 4-step permanent porn pause. And I'm tinkering around with the idea of also calling it the 4-step subconscious sex solution. I'm going to be sending a vote out in my email and let everyone decide what they want. And so we'll see what it's going to be called. The name doesn't matter so much because the steps and the process are identical regardless of the name. And so the permanent porn pause, over 90% of the men who work with me, it's all porn related sex addictions. I would say over 95%, but there are men who I work with very successfully who don't watch any porn whatsoever, but it is a sex related addiction. So we'll see, we'll either call it the 4-step permanent porn pause or the subconscious sex solution. And so take a look down there at the bottom, the very first one, supercharged self-awareness, what you need to know. And so what's going on with that one is you are going to have, well, supercharged self-awareness like you have never had in your entire life. I've had men who have been doing the self-help work and going to therapy and doing all sorts of, deep inner work that always requires self-awareness. And even when someone who's been on that journey for a long time comes into my program and goes through my process and the steps, there's even way more self-awareness to be gained. And so this is really important. These self-awarenesses are mandatory to move forward. And these steps, you can't get to the next step until you've done the one below it. And so what does that supercharged self-awareness look like? And so there's 3 different parts of that self-awareness, and they all come in the form of patterns. We all have tons of patterns. They're subconscious patterns that we sometimes have conscious awareness of our patterns. There's the big obvious overarching pattern that you're here for is the pattern of porn addiction or sex addiction or something under that umbrella addiction, right? That's a pattern. That's a pattern that you have in your life that shows up in your subconscious mind, and you happen to have conscious awareness of it. And so what these patterns are going to be, it's going to be behavioral patterns, emotional patterns, and thought patterns. And so we have the big overarching pattern that you want to break that you're here for. And underneath that umbrella, there are many, many types of other patterns. And so oftentimes a thought pattern will lead to an emotional pattern, which will lead to a behavioral pattern. And it's becoming hyper aware for the first time ever of what all of these patterns are and what they look like. And just crystal clear defining what they are, becoming aware of them. And so that's step 1, is that supercharged self-awareness. And with that, we have some patterns that are good and healthy for us, right? And we have some patterns that are self-destructive. They limit us. They limit us from our potential. They hold us back. And these could be a limiting thought, a limiting behavior, a limiting decision, a limiting emotion, a limiting thought, like all of these things, right? And so it's becoming supercharged in your self-awareness on what patterns you have that are limiting you, that are holding you back. And so you're going to identify the ones that hurt you and then the ones that are helping you. And we want to strengthen the ones that help you, of course. And then we want to eliminate the ones that are hurting you, that are limiting you, that are holding you back, that are causing some sort of pain and suffering in your life. And so that's a supercharged self-awareness. And then we go to step 2 there, consciously choosing new patterns. This is when you have identified all of the things that are limiting you, and then you say to yourself, with each individual pattern, what would I rather have this pattern look like? When I am no longer limited by this pattern, and I change it over into a pattern that is self-empowering, that is healing, that serves me, that feels amazing. What does that new pattern look like? What does that new pattern look like? And so we go through with all of your patterns, your thought patterns, your emotional patterns, your behavioral patterns, okay? And we are going to, on that step 2 there, make a conscious, rational decision where you get to decide, and only you, not me, not anyone else, you get to decide what those new patterns are going to look like for you. And another really important part of step 2, the consciously choosing new patterns, is okay, you have your whole list of limiting patterns that you have laid out in front of you, and you have your whole list of ones that you want to convert them into, what they will look like when you are empowered. And so when we take a look at the limiting ones, the ones that are holding you back, it's not just what they are. It's not just what they are, it's why. Why did they show up in the first place? Each one of those whys points directly to some place in your nervous system and your subconscious mind that needs repair, that needs healing, that needs recovery. That why is actually one of the quintessential most important parts here. That is going to give you even more self-awareness. That kind of piggybacks on the self-awareness from the first one. So that's kind of where step 1 and 2 almost blend into each other, where you know what they are with the self-awareness, and then you discover why these harmful patterns showed up. And that is really insightful, really important. That points directly to parts within you that need healing. Even if there's no memory attached to it, you do not need a memory of the past to know the answer to this. And so you're going to have a whole list of patterns that you currently have that limit you. And then you're going to have a whole list of patterns that empower you that you don't yet have, but you consciously and rationally decide and define that these things, they need to happen. This switch, this conversion needs to happen with all of these patterns, okay? And all of those little patterns are contributing factors to the overarching umbrella of your sex-related addiction. And so that's step 2, is consciously choosing new patterns. But here's the kicker. Just because you have consciously and rationally decided and defined what those are going to look like for you does not mean that you automatically start showing up in that way. It doesn't mean you automatically start behaving and thinking and reacting in that way, because that step 2, that was a job for your conscious rational mind. But guess what? The subconscious mind might feel like a million light years away. The subconscious mind is where all of those patterns exist. And so that brings us to step 3, making the subconscious shifts. This is where we have strategies that you put into play that when you do these strategies, the shift happens, where you have those limiting patterns. And then over on the other side, you have the list of what you want them to look like instead. And when you apply the subconscious strategies, that shift happens. And now they are in alignment. Now they are in congruency. And until that shift happens, you will continue to experience resistance to try to show up in that new way. That new way only becomes easy once the subconscious shift has taken place. And when those subconscious shifts take place, that's called recovery. That's called healing. That's called getting your results. That's called being the man who you want to be, right? And so that essentially brings us to step 4, which is maintain and move forward. And that's really just, you've done the heavy lifting. The problem is really behind you now. The problem is really behind you now. And that move forward really means you are focusing on all of the things in your life that you would rather be focusing on. When you no longer have to put time or energy or effort into focusing on putting this sex-related addiction behind you, you can instead now just focus on the things that you want to. your relationships, your career, your hobbies, whatever it is for you personally, think about it for a moment. What would you rather be focusing on? That's the move forward part. You just get to put all of your energy and time and focus into the move forward with whatever that personally is for you. And so that's essentially the breakdown of the 4 steps. And as you can see, you cannot get to the next step without accomplishing the step below it first, right? It is sequential. It is sequential. So when you're going through recovery and as you're going through the program, one of the fun parts is as you're going through the lessons and as you're going through the action steps, it's going to be pretty obvious and stand out to you like which of those steps does this lesson apply to? Which action step are you engaging in right now? And where does that fall on this 4-step process? It's usually it's pretty easy. And in some lessons, there may be the first 3 steps. For some lessons, it might be just step 1. For some lessons, it might just be step 3. And so it's all laid out in a way that makes sense. And with this 4-step process, knowing it, seeing it, and understanding it, it's just going to all fall into place in a way that will be way easier than you could have ever imagined. And I love this. I can't believe it took me like 4 years almost to come up with this, even though the process was already in play. I didn't have a name or a visual or these steps laid out like this, but the process was happening. This process has been happening for everyone who's already been going through my program. So that being said, that is the 4-step permanent porn pause, or perhaps the subconscious sex solution, depending on what everyone votes on. All right, signing off.